So I'm stood here in front of Humphrey Booth's gravestone. It's behind me here. And Humphrey Booth is not buried here in Sacred Trinity. He's buried in Manchester Cathedral. But the original gravestone was replaced with a posher one, and the original one was reused and then later on not used anymore and found to be Humphrey's original gravestone. So it was brought here to Sacred Trinity because Humphrey Booth was a wealthy merchant who founded Sacred Trinity Church. We are here because of Humphrey Booth's vision and generosity. So Humphrey was a wealthy merchant living in Salford. Salford in those days was a small town of about 1,000 people. Manchester was slightly bigger and had the parish church. So there was a parish church in Manchester, no church in Salford, although the county court was in Salford. So Salford was the more important civic centre, but Manchester had the church. And Humphrey wanted a church for the people of Salford. There'd been some desire to have that for some time. And finally, the Bishop of Chester gave permission for a church to be built in Salford. And so in 1634 or thereabouts, they started building Sacred Trinity Church, what is now Sacred Trinity Church. For most of our life, actually, we were just known as Trinity Church. Humphrey raised the money to build the church. He basically gave most of the money himself. But he also raised money from friends and family. And today we commemorate Humphrey Booth because it's the nearest Sunday to the anniversary of his death. Because he started building the church in 1634. On the 20th of May 1635, Sacred Trinity Church opened. It was consecrated by the Bishop of Chester. There was no diocese of Manchester in those days. And Humphrey Booth managed to come to one service at this church and receive communion before he took to his sickbed and then later died. And sadly he died on, so very soon after we opened. So he died on the 22nd of July 1635. And so we commemorate today Humphrey Booth. We commemorate him because, well, do we commemorate him because he was a wealthy merchant? No. We commemorate him because he was generous with what he had. And he had vision and founded this church to serve the people of Salford, which we've been doing for so many years. You can find out lots more about Humphrey if you Google him, and you know, he gave generously and encouraged others to give generously. And his grandson, who was also known as Humphrey Booth the younger, also gave generously. And of course today the Booth charities still exist and still fund all sorts of good charitable works across the city of Salford and beyond. And that's because Humphrey gave generously, not just to this church, but also to serve the poor of Salford. And he encouraged his friends to give as well. And on his gravestone, we have the words, love his memory, imitate his devotion. And so we are encouraged today to remember Humphrey Booth, but more than that, to do something ourselves, to do our part, to play our part. So Humphrey was wealthy. We don't know how wealthy, we don't know what proportion of his wealth he gave away, we don't know that. We know he was a fustian. Look it up. Today, in today's gospel reading, we hear about somebody else's generosity. we hear about a small boy who sees a crowd of people who've come out to listen to Jesus and they're hungry. And the small boy it is who says, I've got some lunch here with me. I don't mind sharing it. I've got 5 loaves and 2 fishes, which would be a decent lunch actually for one person. But he's willing to share it with this huge crowd. And miraculously, the crowd all are fed. And there's all sorts of speculation about what that means, how that happened, and we don't know. Maybe more people had food than we're letting on. Maybe they were shamed into going, well actually, yeah, come on, here's my offering. Maybe they imitated the devotion of that boy. But the point is that he didn't have very much, 5 loaves and 2 fish, but he offered what he had. Generosity is at the heart of the Christian gospel, the generosity of God towards us, and the call on us to be generous with what we have. And it's interesting that recently we've been looking at the 5 ways of well-being, and the 5 ways of well-being are well researched, and there's evidence that these 5 ways contribute to our mental well-being. And those 5 ways are, you'll have heard this a few times, but they are: connect with others, be active, notice things, keep learning, and give. And what the New Economics Foundation found when they did this research, they found that giving, being generous, is not only good for the world and for those around us, but it's good for us. It's good for our mental well-being to be generous people. And so isn't that encouraging to us that we are not only hearing the call of God when we are generous, not only responding to what God is asking of us, but God is asking of us something that is good not just for the world but for us as well. And so I urge you, think about what you have, what you've received. Be grateful for all that you have, and think about, how can I be generous with what I have? How can I love Humphrey Booth's memory and imitate his devotion and imitate his generosity? Amen.